So today we're going to be looking at Stave 5, the final part of A Christmas Carol. And the big question I want you to consider today is what becomes of Ebenezer Scrooge? How has he changed from the beginning of the story? What's happened to him? And what impact have the ghosts had on him during the course of the story? So what becomes of him by the end of the novel? So I'm going to keep that big question up on the screen so that you can see that at all points. And then we're going to have a look through the actual stave today and pick up where we left last week. So he's just this moment being returned back to his bedroom by the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Christmas is yet to come. And he's now back in his room and eager to make changes. The whole idea of the story is that the ghosts have only got a very small amount of time to work their effect on Scrooge, because he is aware that if he hasn't changed by Christmas Day, it's going to be too late. So there's a recurring motif of time and urgency throughout this story, and Scrooge becoming increasingly desperate to get back to the present so that he can effect some changes in his life to benefit not just those around him, but ultimately himself in the future. So we begin the stave with Scrooge exhibiting that urgency. Yes! And the bedpost was his own, the bed was his own, the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present and the future, Scrooge repeated, as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. They're not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. They're not torn down, rings and all. They're here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at this section. So he's woken up in his room, the bedpost. Remember, he has a 4-poster bed with curtains that surround it. So he's back in his bed and relieved to find that he's there. So the exclamative yes, conveying that. And best of, happiest of all, the time before him was his own. So here we have time as a recurring motif, this idea of the urgency of him needing to change. And he's realised that he's going to be able to make amends. So to make amends just means to put things right, to try and do the right thing. So he's going to go and revisit all of his mistakes with Bob Cratchit and with the way he lives his life, and he's going to try and correct them. And he says this really key line, and it's so key, in fact, we really do need to highlight this one. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. So what this represents is this idea that he's going to learn from the example shown to him by the three spirits. He's going to remember the past kindnesses that he experienced when he was younger from people like Fezziwig, and he's going to consider the impact he has on others in the present, on people like Bob Cratchit and his family, and he's also going to be thinking about the legacy he wants to leave for himself in the future. So he's internalised all of these lessons now, he's taken them all on board. He scrambled out of bed, so that verb scrambled, conveying the urgency. He's desperate to make change now. He wants to rush out and do something about the things he's done wrong in the past. So the spirits of all three shall strive within me. Strive just means to work really hard. So he's kind of taken on board their lessons, as now he wants to work really hard to make changes in himself. And of course, we also see his gratitude to Jacob Marley, his former partner, because it was Marley, remember, who came to Scrooge to try and save him by introducing him to the spirits. So his voice is fluttered, just means that he's kind of excited and nervous. He wants to go and make changes. One thing to be aware of, really interesting here, is we get told that he was glowing with good intentions. So aside from the glowing and good with the alliteration, we've got to keep in mind the imagery here, because glowing is a part of this idea of light. And remember, in the story, we have this recurring motif of darkness equaling ignorance and stupidity and all things that are false and wrong, and light representing truth and goodness, purity and all those things. So the fact that he's now glowing represents the idea that he's now a good person wanting to make change. Right, okay. Now, you might be wondering, what's all this about the bed curtains? Well, if you remember, the Ghost of Christmas Is Yet to Come in the previous Stave 4, showed Scrooge a vision of a kind of pawn shop where these rather disreputable characters have gathered and they are selling Scrooge's items, including the curtains from his room. His former housekeeper has taken them down while his corpse is still in the bed and has then taken them to this shop to sell them on for some money. That's how little she respected him. So Scrooge is seeing these curtains around him now and realising they're still there. He's still got the opportunity to make changes. It's not too late. All right, so that's why he's relieved here. And then we get these kind of very emphatic, declarative short sentences where he says he's going to make change. They will be. I know they will. So he's determined to make those changes. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath, and making a perfect lagoon of himself with stockings. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there, whoop whoop. So, you might be wondering what some of the language is in this moment. Well, garments, this one here is just an old-fashioned word for clothing. So he's busily getting dressed and he's kind of in a bit of state of confusion because he's so nervous with excitement and enthusiasm to go out and make changes that he's kind of losing control of himself and putting his clothes on in a rush, putting them on upside down and making himself a bit of an idiot. So this idea, I don't know what to do, is this idea he doesn't know what to do first. He's trying to get out there and he's eager to make the changes. So he's in a bit of a silly rush and laughing at himself. What about this idea of perfect lagoon of himself with stockings? Well, this is a reference to a famous statue of a man in agony. It just means that he's struggling with his stockings and his clothing and he's making a bit of an idiot of himself, and this is kind of a little bit of a joke. And because we get this nice little simile, I'm as light as a feather, so all the kind of the burdens of his tight-fistedness of the money, all the kind of anxieties and things he's had is now been lifted because he now realises he has a chance to make a change and change the future. So he's relieved, and we can see that relief through these kind of descriptions. A Merry Christmas to everybody, Happy New Year to all the world, hello there, whoop, hello, all these exclamatives conveying his relief and enthusiasm, and he's on his way to make changes. He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. There's the saucepan that the gruel was in, cried Scrooge, starting off again and going round the fireplace. There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas Paris present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right, it's all true, it all happened. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. So frisked is kind of just conveying the kind of energy and excitement of him bouncing into the room. He's seen all these different things that were there when he encountered the other ghosts, so he's convincing himself now that he believes in the ghost, he believes what they've shown him, whereas if you contrast that to his behaviour in Stave 1, when he sees Marley in the doorknob and Marley's face in the doorknob, he kind of goes into a state of denial and pretends it isn't happening. But now he's realised that this is all true. And of course he's laughing, to show his happiness, his joy, and the fact he's now a generous, warm-hearted character, a bit more like Fezziwig than the former Scrooge. I don't know what day of the month it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop! Hello there! He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding-dong bell, bell-dong-ding, hammer-clang clash. Oh, glorious, glorious! Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold, cold piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells, oh glorious, glorious. So here we can see Scrooge's enthusiasm and excitement really kind of taking control of him. Now, of course, because he's been with the spirits for quite a period of time, he's not sure where or when he is as such, because he doesn't know how long the spirits had him away. So when he hears the church bells, he's beginning to realise, of course, that he's there on Christmas morning. So the transport doesn't mean say that he's physically moving. It's more the idea that his mind's been taken elsewhere, transported away. In this case, he hears the church bells ringing and he realises that it's Christmas Day and he is, of course, near home. The lustiest peals means just like the really kind of strong and energetic and enthusiastic bell ringing. The peal of the church bells means the ringing of the church bells. So the clash, clang and hammers just refers to the hammers on the church bells making the sounds. And we get this lovely kind of structure here: clash, clang, hammer, ding dong bell, bell dong ding, hammer, clang, clash. And you can see what's happened here is an inversion of the sentence structure. So the actual word order has changed. This is actually a technique called chiasmus, but it's there just to kind of create this kind of musicality, this kind of beautiful kind of sounds, and of course the religious imagery that goes with it, this idea of purity and goodness being restored. And I get the lovely repetition, glorious, glorious, because Scrooge himself is delighted that he's got this opportunity to change and he's now a good man ready to make those changes. We also see his enthusiasm in his movements. So he's running to the window, keen to kind of get out there and see everything. And of course we get this nice contrast with some of the descriptions we've had earlier in the story. So we have no fog, no mist. It's clear, it's bright. Jovial means cheerful or jolly. Stirring cold. So this idea that the cold isn't unpleasant here, it's kind of invigorating and making him feel more enthusiastic. And we get, of course, references to light again, continuing that theme of light equaling truth and goodness and purity. Whereas in the past we've seen Scrooge associated with darkness and gloom and those things that represent ignorance, whereas now, of course, he's changed, so he's now associated with light. The golden sunlight, continuing that theme, and of course the religious overtones of things like heavenly. So he's changed, he's a changed man. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about him. "Eh?" returned the boy, with all his might of wonder. "What's today, my fine fellow?" said Scrooge. "Today?" replied the boy. "Why, Christmas Day." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello," returned the boy. "Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner?" Scrooge inquired. "I should hope I did," replied the lad. So, basically what's happening here is Scrooge is confirming it is indeed Christmas Day. He's seen a young boy in the street and he's just called out a question to him and asked him to confirm it. And of course the boy is full of wonder because he's thinking, well, how can anyone forget it's Christmas Day? So the boy's just a bit puzzled by Scrooge's behaviour. A poulterer is a person who sells birds to eat, so things like turkeys and chickens and what have you. So Scrooge is essentially directing the boy to go and buy a turkey for the Cratchit family, which we're going to see in a moment. "An intelligent boy," said Scrooge, "a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one." "What, the one as big as me?" returned the boy. "What a delightful boy," said Scrooge. "It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck." "It's hanging there now," replied the boy. "Is it?" said Scrooge. "Go and buy it." "Walker," explained the boy. Okay, so in this bit we have Scrooge's enthusiasm continuing, and he's referring to a prize turkey. Very often butchers would hang their best examples of their meats in their windows to entice customers. So we have this enormous turkey hanging in the window, and Scrooge is basically going to give the boy some money to go and buy it for the family. You might be wondering what the term walker means. Well, in Victorian kind of colloquial slang, it's basically like saying jog on or fat chance or get lost. It has that kind of slang, slang phrase like, yeah, right. So the boy's basically saying that because he thinks, I can't go and buy that turkey. It costs a fortune. All right. He doesn't realise that Scrooge is, of course, going to give him the money to do so. No, says Scrooge. I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you a half-crown. The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have shot half so fast. "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and spitting with laugh. "He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be." So what's going on here is just basically, as it suggests, he's going to get the boy to go and buy the turkey, bring it back to the house. Scrooge will tell the shop owner where to deliver the turkey, and he's doing it as a kind of a humorous joke to try and surprise Bob, but also it's partly his way of saying sorry for all the harsh behaviour he's exhibited to his employee over the years. So he's going to buy this enormous turkey to feed his family on Christmas Day, and also a way of apologising to Bob for his past behaviour. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there, waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. "I shall love it as long as I live," said Scrooge, patting it with his hand. "I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, whoop! How are you? Merry Christmas!" So the knocker he's referring to here is the door knocker, where, if you remember in Stave 1, he sees the ghost of Jacob Marley's face first appear. So he's now realising that the door knocker began the whole, essentially, journey he's taken with the ghosts, which is why he's saying he loves it, because he loves the fact it's given him the chance to change and make amends for his life. So he's simply showing his gratitude here. Right, and when we get the little dash here, the hyphen, because now, of course, this signals the arrival of the turkey with the delivery man, and he's getting excited, and we can see all the kind of exclamatives everywhere, loads of them, lots and lots and lots of exclamations, because he's full of enthusiasm and happiness for the first time in his, well, not the first time in his life, he used to be happy in the past, but first time in his adult life, he's showing some happiness. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped them short off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. "Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town," said Scrooge. "You must have a cab." The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. So we're getting kind of a sense here of the size of the turkey being so big that it wouldn't have even been able to stand up when it was alive. The cab here isn't like a taxi car we have today. This would have been a horse-drawn carriage. But the point is, it's really just showing the generosity of Scrooge, that he's prepared to pay for the poulterer's delivery man to actually take a cab to deliver the turkey to Cratchit. And then we get this repetition of him chuckling. And it's a lovely example of anaphora. Anaphora, remember, is where a series of phrases or a series of sentences begin with the same sentence structure. And that is spelt like, let me show you, like that, anaphora. Okay, so anaphora, series of phrases beginning with the same sentence structure. So we have it here, look, the chuckle, and so on. Yeah, you get the idea. So series of phrases all begin with the same beginning part, because he's delighted, he's chuckling, he's laughing. It's this excessive generosity of spirit and enthusiasm and happiness that he's exhibiting. Right, and then of course he goes to shave and makes a bit of a mess of it, but he doesn't care. Even though he cuts himself, he'll just put a plaster on him. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that the 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir, Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that all of the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. Okay, so he's dressed in his Sunday best, his finest clothes, because he's planning, of course, to show his delight in Christmas. He's showing that he's a changed man, but also he's dressing up to go and pay a call on the Cratchits and wish them a Merry Christmas. And we're seeing a very big change in him, because, of course, he's being friendly to everyone he meets, and he's wishing them a Merry Christmas, whereas before he would have said bah humbug and dismissed Christmas. Blithe just means pleasant or peaceful and nice. So he's basically saying that he's enjoying human company for the first time in a long time, whereas before he's been a bit sort of miserable and dismissive of people. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before, and said, "Scrooge and Marbles, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, "how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." So we're seeing something quite interesting here. He's encountered some of the people that he saw through the visions provided by the ghost of Christmas is yet to come, and he saw how some of those people were quite dismissive of him, quite indifferent to him. So here he has an opportunity. If he wanted, he could actually kind of sort of get one own back on them and say something nasty to them, but he doesn't, because he realizes that he wants to change and he wants to make people think better of him. So he basically greets this man and is very pleasant to him and nice to him, because he wants to create a new future for himself where people remember him fondly. So he's not got any spite in him or anger about what was said. He's going to try and put forward a better impression as much as he can. So we see that here. "Mr. Scrooge." "Yes," said Scrooge, "that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness," here Scrooge whispered in his ear. "Lord bless me," cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" So we get a nice little bit of dramatic tension here. We're wondering what is it he's whispering in this man's ear, and he's apologising for his past unpleasantness. And now we want to know, what is it he said to this guy? "If you please," said Scrooge, "not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favour?" "My dear sir," said the other, shaking his hands with him, "I don't know what to say to such "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me." "I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. "Will you come and see me?" So essentially he's giving this man some kind of favourable business deal, great many back payments. So it's suggesting he's given this man a substantial sum of money, which implies that in the past he's been quite stingy and lacking in generosity, and now he's making up for it. The word that's been cut off here is the word munificence, which looks like that, right? So great display of munificence means like generosity, kindness, and all those things, and he's demonstrating that here to this man. "Thank you," says Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times, bless you." He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head and questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. So he's gone to church, again symbolically this idea that he's now a good man, and he's going around the town looking at everyone getting ready for Christmas Day and just kind of soaking it up and enjoying himself. And of course he's now going to start visiting people to make amends for his past behaviour, beginning with his nephew Fred. He passed the door a dozen times, but before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl, very. "Yes, sir." Where is he, my love?" said Scrooge. "He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." So he's paid a visit to his nephew Fred, and he's surprised these people. He's already been nice to them, which is catching them quite by surprise, because they're used to him being quite an unpleasant chap. "Thank you, he knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. "I'll go in here, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points, and like to see that everything is right. "Fred," said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started! Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with a footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. So he's basically ignored the house maid and walked straight into their dining room to pay them a visit, and it's caught his niece-in-law quite by surprise, because remember, she's not that keen on Scrooge, and no one's expecting to see him because he's not someone who normally celebrates Christmas. So he's given them a bit of a shock. And we can also see by some of the terms of endearment he uses, like "my dear," how much his speech is reflecting his change of character. He's using all these nice terms of endearment to show how pleasant he's now being. "Why, bless my soul," cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" "Let him in? It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness." So, basically what this is showing is he's having a really nice time with his nephew and niece by marriage, and enjoying their family and their company. We get the repetition of wonderful. It's also a nice kind of deliberate sort of misspelling of it, essentially, here to emphasise the actual phonetic sounds of it, just how much he's enjoying it. Wonderful! It's really kind of is exaggerating his change of character and his delight in Christmas. Fred, remember, is like his sister Fan, who was very generous of spirit, so Fred's very welcoming and invites him in without any fuss. Right, let's move on. "But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open, that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge, in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" So, essentially, because Scrooge used to be quite tight with money and he was lacking in Christmas spirit, he's making Marley work the Christmas holiday, or part of it. So now he's basically putting on an act. Scrooge is pretending to be the miserable man he used to be in order to play a little bit of a joke on Bob. So he's faking being cross with him when he arrives, even though he's not actually cross at all. He's kind of wanting to play a joke on him. "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I'm behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob, appearing from the tank. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. "I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." So, of course, Bob is being very defensive because he thinks he's going to get told off for being late to work because he's been enjoying some of the Christmas spirits. And he's apologising, saying, "Oh, it's only Christmas. I'm really sorry I won't do it again." And Scrooge is kind of continuing his act until the last moment where he reveals that he's not going to fire him or tell him off or do anything horrible. Quite the opposite, he's going to give him a pay rise. Because, of course, Scrooge is now a changed man. Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." So Bob's trembling because he thinks Scrooge has gone mad. He's had some kind of stroke or some kind of seizure or something's gone wrong with him. So the idea of a straight waistcoat is basically like a straight jacket, because he's so used to the miserable Scrooge that he thinks that something's actually gone wrong and happened to him. But of course Scrooge reveals he's being serious. Earnestness means serious, and he's actually just in a really good mood. And he's also saying he's going to give him a pay rise and help his family. That's what assist means. And he's going to basically have a drink for him. And crucially, we get the symbolism here, making up the fires. Remember, in the past, Scrooge would only be prepared to put single coal on the fire. Well, now he's being generous, very much like Fezziwig, and he's prepared to make a big fire to warm the office and bring some cheerfulness and heat into their lives. And this is reference to dotting another I. Remember, Cratchit's job as a clerk is to do paperwork. So he's basically saying, put down the paperwork, get out there, buy some more coal. We're going to have a nice time. Which, of course, completely shocks poor old Bob. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the old good city knew, or any of the good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. So we're being told now, we've got a bit of a kind of a jump ahead in the kind of time and structure of the novel, because now we're kind of projecting forward into what Scrooge is going to do in the future. So we're told that he's made all these promises to the family, but actually he's gone beyond that. He's become like a second father to Tiny Tim, and we're told rather emphatically that Tiny Tim survives. He's alive, and it's implied, of course, that he's partly thanks to the efforts of Scrooge to help the family. And we get this lots of repetition of good friend, good master, good man in the good city. Right, so we get this idea of goodness now pervading the story because Scrooge has changed his ways. And we're also sensing the way in which Scrooge is kind of, no longer caring how people perceive him. He laughs. When people laugh at him, he just lets them laugh. And he thinks, well, they're miserable sorts, so perhaps it's best they do just laugh at some point. So he's no longer kind of that concerned about how people see him. But ironically, by no longer being concerned in how people see him, those people end up seeing him better anyway. So, he's a much better man for the transformation. So, he had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. So, this idea with intercourse with the spirits just means he had no more conversations, no more interactions with the spirits, because they don't need to visit him anymore. There's no lessons for them to teach him. He's learnt everything he needed to learn, and he's changed his ways to become a good person. So abstinence means to kind of give something up or live without it. So this total abstinence principle, he's basically abstaining from his past sins and mistakes. He's become a much better person. It was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. So basically the reputation he now has is that he really knows how to celebrate Christmas, but not just on that one day, but the generosity of spirit all year round. And of course we finish with the famous line, God bless us, everyone. So the idea of Tiny Tim finishing the story is really symbolic, because Tiny Tim represents this kind of innocence and purity in the story. He represents the suffering of the poor. He represents the child, and the kind of theme of purity and innocence of children is in the story too. And so finishing with this is this idea of the story's return to innocence. Scrooge has returned to innocence and goodness, and of course Tiny Tim is alive and well thanks to Scrooge's transformation. So what's going on here is this kind of lesson. So we need to keep in mind didactic, which means to teach. So the story of A Christmas Carol is a didactic story. Didactic, incidentally, is an adjective. So it's teaching us the importance of not just being good people and kind and generous. It's the idea of the rich doing more to support the needs of the poor. So there is a kind of a moral lesson here that that Dickens is trying to impart through Scrooge's transformation. Okay, so that concludes the story. What I want you to do next is to think about the actual question, which is what becomes of Scrooge? What is important about his transformation? What are we meant to learn from it? So you're going to answer that question. You're going to write a few paragraphs, ideally use some quotations from the stave or from the other staves of the story. But otherwise, that concludes today's session.